Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Margaret Kwaje, the Provincial Director of the Legal Practice Council, as well as the Acting Manager for the Education Portfolio. The purpose of today's session is to give further guidance in preparation for the competency-based exams, and the presenters will share some pointers and tips for you to keep in mind when preparing for this examination. I also trust that you have looked through the syllabus, which was circulated to candidates and is also available on our social media website. Before we begin, please allow me to discuss some household rules. Due to the high number of candidates attending these sessions, all questions and comments can be typed in the Q&A column of this webinar. At the end of the webinar, Mr. Letebele will read all the questions and the presenters will answer to the relevant questions posed to them. If there's any suggestions that you would like to make concerning this webinar sessions or anything concerning the exam, you are welcome to address an email to info@lpc.org.za. The subject of your email must please read competency-based exam. That is if your query relates to the exam. The recording of today's session will be made available within 2 days on our social media platforms as well as on the LPC YouTube platform. We encourage you to follow the LPC on its social media platforms. Please remember that you as candidate attorneys, you already have knowledge and skills to become strong and competent legal practitioners. The purpose of this exam is just to test your knowledge and to see whether you are capable of doing well in the profession. The exams are simply a measure of your readiness and for you to enter this profession. The LPC supports you and we are confident that you will do well. We cannot wait to welcome you into this legal profession and wish you all the best of luck for the upcoming exams. Please note, the exam is on the 18th and 19th of March. Don't miss those dates. I will now hand over to Mr. Thomas Mini, who will be presenting on paper 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Thomas Mini, as my colleague said, and I'll be presenting on paper 1. All right, so the syllabus for paper 1 covers High Court practice, Magistrate Court practice, motor vehicle accidents, and criminal procedure. The syllabus is fairly extensive, but has been set out in a pretty logical and decent order so that you can understand what is expected from you during the exams. Now, before I get into the exam proper, there are just a few things that I want to bring to your attention, and it's the following. We've been doing this, my colleagues and myself sitting here today have been doing the exams now for some years, and I can assure you that they will share my sentiment on the following. It is obvious when we mark the exams that candidates just don't read the question. Make sure when you read the exam and you read the specific exam question, make sure you understand and come to grips with what is being tested. If you find candidates head off on a tangent and you wonder where on earth did they come, what made them go in that direction, remember, you are here writing your exams to qualify as an attorney. So my advice to you is, when you write the exam, think like an attorney. What would you do as an attorney? We find candidates writing answers which border on social sciences and trying to be nice and request people to help them. It's a legal question. We want to know in terms of law. Okay, that in terms of the question. Second thing is, remember, you cannot write on the left-hand side of the page. We find candidates writing on the left-hand side of the page and we cannot mark that. All right. So that as far as the technicalities are concerned. Then another big issue for us is handwriting. Ladies and gentlemen, when you write your exam, when the examiner opens the exam book to mark it, he gets an impression of the person that's answering the exam. Do not start yourself off on a bad footing with the examiner with a exam script that is scratched and scribbled and sprawling all over the place, handwriting that is illegible, because it makes it extremely difficult to give the candidate marks. Make sure you make it easy for the marker. All right. That being said, let's get into it. Right. So the first two modules is High Court and Magistrates Court practice. Now, I'm going to deal with those two topics as one because they're very similar. So the first thing that you must understand with regards to the High Court and Magistrates Court practice is the difference between the procedures that we use in civil litigation. We find candidates still referring to parties in an action proceeding as an applicant. Make sure you understand the various mechanisms by which you institute proceedings in terms of civil litigation and how the parties are referred to and what the process looks like. In other words, when you do an application, it's by way of motion, it's by way of affidavit. What types of affidavits do you get? And make sure you understand those processes and it's part of your thinking process. All right. Like I said, how are parties referred to? Make sure you understand that. When you're dealing with High Court and Magistrates Court practice, the questions will always steer you in a certain direction of whether the examiner wants to test if you understand whether a matter must be brought in the High Court or the Magistrates Court. So for that component of your knowledge, you have to understand what gives the jurisdiction of those two different courts. Make sure you know it. Because if you head down the wrong road, you're down the wrong road. Okay. Because the rules relating to the High Court and the Magistrates Court are not all the same. They're similar, but they're not the same. So my advice to you is make yourself a flow diagram of the rules of court for the Magistrates Court and a flow diagram for the rules of court of the High Court. Then see how they differ, because that's normally where the examiners like to question, is what makes the High Court and the Magistrates Court different. Okay. You have to know your rules. You cannot write this exam if you do not know the rules of court, because civil litigation in the High Court and the Magistrates Court is governed under the uniform rules. You have to know them. And you have to know which one comes after which one. How do they plug into each other? Okay. We want to test whether you understand the process and whether you can draft the documents to show us that you understand the process. So when a question is asked, a drafting question, the drafting question's aim is to see if you understand the process and the rules and certain information regarding which was given to you in the question. Can you put it all together and extrapolate it into a meaningful document? So that is what we're testing when we test you under Magistrates Court and High Court practice. Okay. The syllabus is it's well set out. It's not difficult to understand. You have to know what's in that syllabus. I'm not going to deal with specifics, but different types of applications, defenses, and so on. It's run-of-the-mill stuff. You have to know it. Okay. That then as far as High Court and Magistrates Court practice. Motor vehicle accidents. It is a portion of your syllabus for paper 1 that is an absolute score. You can score big marks in this section of the work. There are only 11 topics to be studied. And if you know the Act and you know the differences between the original 1989 Act and the 1996 Act, you will be fine. I'm going to deal with just a couple of things quickly. Okay, so the questions that you need to know is, who may institute a claim against the RAF? What initiates a claim against the RAF? Go and look specifically at what I call the unique persons. Minors, people who have mental illness, People who now have been injured to such an extent they can't think, they can't deal for themselves. What is the consequence of that? How does that affect the process? Understand how that process works. Okay. Understand the issues regarding causation, wrongfulness, fault, and damages, because it's a delete at the end of the day. And understand how these elements of this specific delete, how they differ and how are they unique with regards to your drafting skills in the event that there is a claim against the road accident fund. There are specific allegations that must be made. Okay. In this portion of the work, you also get to deal with fees. What makes the fee structure unique or could make it unique with regards to motor vehicle accident claims? Know it. Know how to draft it if you are asked to draft it. Everything relating to lodgement of claims, especially with regards to time frames and the documents required. You have to know all the documents, you have to know what must be in the documents, what is their function, and the time frames. Prescription. By when must I lodge? Under different heads, when must I lodge? Prescription runs differently for different types of claimants. Know that. Know who they are and know what those time frames are. Okay. And then, of course, everything relating to drafting. Defenses, you might be asked, possible that you could be asked that you're acting on behalf of the road accident fund, not as on behalf of the claimant. So you have to be able to understand this body of work, but from both sides. Okay. Then with regards to criminal procedure, the list in the syllabus is very specific. It's, once again, not at all difficult to understand. It is a volume of work. But here, it's very important to understand the specific sections. You have to go through the specific sections that are listed in your syllabus. You cannot write the exam if you haven't gone through it. You cannot guess it. Because criminal procedure has very specific terminology, and the mechanisms of how it functions is very specific and has to be correct. Okay, so as far as the process is concerned, for yourself, make sure you understand, how does a criminal trial, how does it play out in court? Do you know, from the minute the person is arrested, what takes place then? Arrested, taken into custody, bail, possibly bail denied, bail granted, what's the consequence? All the way through sentencing, not acquitted. What's the difference? What happens? What's the possible sanctions that can be imposed by the court? And depending on what those are, how do I then go from there to a review and an appeal? What's the difference between a review and appeal? When do I use which one? Okay. Then with regards to the drafting aspect, you have to know how to draft a charge sheet. The reason you must know how to draft a charge sheet for yourself is to understand what would happen and be able to identify defects in a charge sheet and what the consequences are of such defects. Can it be rectified? If it's rectified, what is the consequence to the person accused? If it is rectified, what happens to the process? So everything that happens, can it happen first of all? Can it take place? And when it does, what is the consequence? How does the mechanism change with regards to the process? Understand it. Because many times the question is asked, and then you ask the question is asked in such a way to see if you understand, because now we're dealing with a unique situation where, for example, a charge sheet is defective. Question would come and say, can you fix it? Okay, those are the types of questions that will be asked to test whether you have studied the work and whether you know what the process is. A plea. How do you draft a plea with regards to a criminal matter? It's not the same as a civil matter. Okay, understand the difference. Plea and sentence agreements, they happen every single day. Have to know how to do it. Okay, go and read up. You will find them in the section in the criminal procedure syllabus. And then, as I said, the types of sentences which a court could impose, you have to know what they are. And then the appeals and reviews and search and seizure. Search and seizure is interesting topic because the questions normally are asked. I don't know if they'll be asked in this exam, but when do search and seizures take place? Under which circumstances may they take place? What must happen before they are allowed to take place? And can they take place without such processes taking place? Okay, so you have to understand the entire process relating to the criminal procedure process in South African law. Okay, and it's very specific, so it's not difficult to study. So, to round up, High Court, Magistrates Court practice, know the rules. Motor vehicle accident, it's simple, you have to know all the 11 topics. Criminal procedure, go through each one of the specific sections that are given to you. You must know them. Okay, thank you very much, and good luck. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Ms. Vanessa Johnson.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I hope you can all hear me. I hope that you find this session valuable. Remember that you are 2 weeks away from probably one of the biggest exams that you will ever write. And I'm going to give you some pointers and tips, and I'm going to discuss with you what you can expect from the estates paper, paper 2. Now, I always say preparation is key. Do not, please do not underestimate the estates question. You have, with estates, we can only ask you a specific portion of work. So once you read through it and you think you know it and you've seen a will and you know more or less what the Wills Act says, you think that you are prepared. You are not prepared by then. You have to study the theory. And then once you know the theory very well, we are going to test a workable knowledge of that theory. So we're going to ask you to draft documents. The paper will always consist of at least, more or less, at least 60 to 70 marks for the liquidation and distribution account. So you know that is the most important thing that you have to study. But do not think that if you can only do the liquidation and distribution account that you will be able to pass the examination. It's not that easy. You have to study the Wills Act. You have to study the Interstate Succession Act, because those 3 sections are definitely going to appear in your examination. And then the balance of the paper will always be some theoretical type of question. Now, I said that we are going to test a workable knowledge of your theoretical knowledge, and the way we are going to do it is we're going to ask you a scenario. We're going to give you a scenario. So we are going to expect of you to identify the type of theory that you needed to know and whether you can apply that into practice. At the end of the day, estates forms a huge part of a practice. It's one of those certain things in life. People have to die, so estates will always be there. It's also a very important thing because you have to remember that you work with people's money. You work with the deceased's money, you work with the heir's money, and you work with your money. So it's not a subject that you can go along and say, oh, I'll figure it out as I go along, especially in the examination. You have to know what you are doing before you even write the examination. I just want to get back to the preparation part. Be sure that you take at least 2 or 3 or 4 black pens into the examination. You can only write in black, so do not write in any other color. You can only write on the one side, or you can write on both sides of the book pages, but we're only going to mark the right side. Do not write in pencil. We're not going to mark pencil. We're not going to mark black pens. So you have to take your pens. The key, and Mr. Keen also said that please make sure that your papers are neat and tidy. A neat paper obviously just puts everyone in a better mood, and especially the examiner. So take a ruler, use the ruler for drafting your L&D account. My tip for candidates who are going to write is that you prepare your liquidation and distribution account right from the beginning. Take it 1 or 2 minutes. Practice to open a L&D account from the beginning and space it out. Do not cramp it up. Write neatly so that we can exactly see what you are going to do. Take your calculator. You are not allowed to take your cell phone in. You are not allowed to take your smartwatches in. So my advice is, buy yourself a calculator now. Get yourself the calculator you are going to use. Borrow it from someone, but start preparing for the examination with that same calculator, because you must remember that you're under pressure. You are in a more anxious mood when you write the examination. So the better prepared you are, the easier you are going to make it for yourself. So get used to your calculator so that once you start with the examination, that will not be something that's not familiar, especially because calculators differ. Some, the plus and the minus and the equal digits are in different places. The other thing I want to ask you is to, if possible, and it will be possible because I promise you, you will have enough paper in your books. Don't cram it up. Space your answers out. The more it's spaced out, the easier it marks. Take a page for each question. If you're at the end of a page or in the middle of the page, by the end of a question, turn around and start a new question on a next page. It makes it easier. If you want to leave open pages because you think that you're going to come back to a question, you are also allowed to do that. Once we mark the paper, we will go through the whole book to see whether there are pages which were left clean, and then if there are something that we have to mark further on. The other thing I want to ask you is to remember that when you write the examination, that it's a 2.5 paper examination. So the time is now, since they have added the extra time, it's easier to get through the whole question paper. You have that 15 minutes before you start with the question paper, and I really want you to take that 15 minutes, take a deep breath, sit down and read through the paper. Scan the paper in the first instance for where is the liquidation and distribution account question, where is the wills question, where is the intestate question, and what other theoretical questions there are. Make yourself familiarize yourself right from the start what you are going to do through the next 2.5 hours. Then decide on which question you are going to answer first. You are allowed to answer in any order. Just mark it clearly that you start with question 2 or you start with question 3. And it's no problem. If you want to leave out open pages, that's fine. Start with a question that you are most familiar with, so that you can get the confidence in knowing what you're answering. I always advise students to look at the question, the marks of the question. Say, for instance, it is a liquidation and distribution account for 60 marks. Take 1 minute per mark and work through the whole question in an hour. After an hour, after the 60 minutes, or if the marks are 30 marks for a question, take 30 minutes. After that, decide where you are in this question. If you're at the utmost end, that's fine. Take another 1 or 2 minutes. But if you see that you still have a lot to do, go ahead with the next question. I always tell students that there are more marks in the beginning of a next question than at the end of another question where you might have already made a mistake. So you're going to work with incorrect amounts. That's just a tip for preparation. Do not underestimate the estate. And let's go to the wills question. Remember the Wills Act, you have to know the sections of the Wills Act. You have to know how to draft a Wills Act. You can only draft any type of document. You cannot draft any type of document unless you know the theory thereof. So wills can either be theoretically, or they can ask you to draft a will or a portion of the will. So make sure that you know the wills question very well. Intestate is a given. You will have an intestate question. Now, those are usually between 10, 12, up to 20 marks, more or less. That is the question where you can have full marks. But you have to study the Intestate Succession Act, and then you have to apply it. The only way that you are going to get good at the applications of your theoretical knowledge is by exercises. Exercise, exercise, exercise. Now, we usually, in all the exams, we ask candidates not to rely on previous papers. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Because I know many candidates don't study the work, but they go through a paper and then they see, okay, well, I would have been able to do this one. Then they go into the examination and it's been asked in a different way. But having said that, once you understand or know the Wills Act, once you understand the intestate, once you understand how to draft a liquidation and distribution account, you are more than welcome to go back to previous questions and practice the application of your knowledge for that. Another thing, if you're asked the liquidation and distribution account question, look at what they ask. They are going to give you a scenario. It's an introduction of the person and whether he's married, how he's married, when he died, whether he had a will or not, and who his heirs will be, or his descendants, or people that he left behind. But then go to the end of that question and see what they ask you. If they ask you to draw the liquidation and distribution account, you have to make sure that you are going to do all the sections of the liquidation and distribution account in that subsequent order. So you need to know Regulation 5. I am sorry to say, but if you do not know Regulation 5, you do not understand Regulation 5, you do not know how it looks in practice, and what we are going to expect of you in the examination, you won't get the marks. Another tip I can give you is that you have to remember that when we get the memorandum as examiners to mark, or all the examiners to mark, there are marks allocated for specific amounts or specific entries. So you have to rely on the entries you make, because those are the easy ones. The amounts are usually the place where you can go wrong. I often find that students study the heading because that's easy. They study the liquidation account. They know how to do the liquidation account. We've got no problem with that. Then they sort of know what the recapitulation statement is about. And then for some or other reason, they do not understand, or they do not practice the application of the distribution account. Remember, the liquidation account is all about the assets, and the distribution account is all about the heirs. But please study that. Look at previous papers, what they want, where they allocate the marks, and make sure that at least you're writing your entries will be correct for, we cannot give you a mark for an incorrect amount, but we can give you half a mark for the entry. So do not think that if you balance at the end, if everything works out and you don't have estate duty or you do have estate duty, you are going to fail the question. I always tell candidates, yes, we all aim for perfection. We want 100% for everything. But you're under pressure. You are given a set of fresh information. You have to deal with this in a limited time. So try your best, but the only way to ensure that you're going to get the marks is by practicing and knowing and studying the work that you are expected to know. The other thing I want to just say is that you do not need to know a living will. We won't ask you to draft a living will, but you need to know what a living will is, at least. As I said, intestate, anything and everything about the wills, definitely anything and everything about the liquidation and distribution account. But you also need to know the process of an estate. Any other type of question, a shorter type of question can come from that. So you need to know the process. Although the customary marriages is not a subject under this syllabus. I think it's under paper 3. Make sure that you are known with the subject of customary marriages, and to know that if it's one spouse, it's in community of property. If there are more, it's out of community of property. Look at whether the accrual will be applicable or not, because it's knowledge that we can test in a liquidation and distribution account or an intestate question. And you have to know, if they say there is one customary wife, you need to know that that is a marriage in community of property. I just want to give you one other tip for the intestate succession question. When you get that, always start with the information they give you. Start with, they say there is a gross estate and the liabilities or something. So you calculate the net estate, because the net estate is the one that you are going to distribute, if they do ask you something like that. Then go to the marriageal regime. Say this person is married in community of property, therefore half will go to the other person. This person is married out of community of property, therefore the whole estate will inherit in terms of the Intestate Succession Act. Then go to the spouse's situation. Say that the spouse will get 250,000 or a child's portion, whichever is greater. If you do not say that, we cannot give you the mark. If you do the whole calculation and you give the correct amounts to the correct people, but we do not know how you calculated that, we cannot give you the full marks. Then once you've done that, calculate the child's portion, tell us how you did that, and then you start with each person. The surviving spouse gets this person gets this person gets this. And then also, once you've done that, go to the people who do not inherit. So go to that portion and also make sure that you say this person will not inherit and the reason for that. One other thing is you have to know what a limited interest is, because that is important for massed estates. You need to know what a massed estate is, Section 37. They can either ask you that theoretically, they can ask you to do the clause in the will of a massed estate, and they can also ask you to draw the adiation or the repudiation certificate. So you need to know the theory and you need to know how to apply it. They will not ask you to draft a massed estate liquidation and distribution account, but there is a limited interest involved there. Limited interests are involved in your liquidation and distribution account under the fiduciary asset account. So you need to know that. You need to know how to do a fiduciary asset account. Those are the fiduciary assets are exactly as important as all the other assets. And then obviously in the estate duty, you will be asked or the limited interest will be involved. Estate duty, do not underestimate estate duty, but also do not overcomplicate estate duty. If you go through the legal aid notes, lead notes, they are very, very good. If you go through people who can assist you with explaining the estate duty, you will be fine. But remember, in all, you have to have one complete liquidation and distribution account, which makes sense, which reads as a story of what the assets and the liabilities are and what needs to be paid. Then fiduciary assets, the marks I've told you. For instance, if you write, if you calculate the executor's remuneration in your liquidation account, make sure that you say how you calculate it. It's 3.5% of the total assets, because you might have made a mistake with your assets. You might then, or you will then calculate the executor's remuneration incorrectly, but you will still at least get half a mark of that, that the formula that you reflected there. So my advice is, study hard. Do not underestimate estates. Make sure that you prepare well, first with the theory, then with the application, and then you start doing questions. Practice, practice, practice. That's the only way to pass this paper. And good luck. I am sure that all of you will be prepared well, that you have started already, hopefully, and then get to the examination. Once you are prepared, you have taken a lot of pressure off yourself. And if you take all the tools you need, the pens, the ruler, the calculator, you can take a pencil and an eraser, but you're not going to use that on the writing side of the paper, then all will be well. All right, thank you. I'm going to hand over to Hajira Kara now for the paper 3.
Good afternoon. I have been tasked with the paper that I think frightens most candidates. So I think step 1 in terms of paper 3 is mind over matter. You must not be afraid. You must prepare well for the exam, have the syllabus in front of you, tick off whatever it is that you have been through, but over and above that, you must train yourself to understand it's an exam. I can do this. So conquer that fear before you get to the exam. Also, what you must take into mind is that you cannot write paper 3 if you have not read the code of conduct. It is imperative that you read the code of conduct, you understand what it is that legal practitioners can do, what they can't do. Of course, you need to read this in alignment with the Legal Practice Act, and it's important that you look at the sections as set out in your syllabus. But over and above that, these are our guiding books, so you must pay attention to them. Now, unlike paper 1 or paper 2, paper 3 doesn't only look at, for example, only the drafting. If you look at the Code of Conduct, if you look at the Legal Practice Act, it looks at the practice of an attorney. What is it that an attorney can do? What is it that an attorney can't do? It's about assessing you as a practitioner. Now, you need, and my colleagues have already said this, you need to write legibly, you need to write in black pen, and you must write on the one side of the page, meaning the right side. This paper here has extra time now, so it means that you have the time to be able to read and assess your answers. Use the first 15 minutes to read the paper constructively. When you write ethics, you need to imagine yourself as, I'm an attorney who is an attorney, which is in a practice within a practice. So your examiner doesn't know where you work, if you don't work, that is irrelevant. What would you do as an attorney in that situation? That's what the question is testing you on. You also must take into account that if a question, for example, says to you, the mark allocation is 10 marks, you must be able to assess how much I need to write for 10 marks. But write clearly, write concisely. We are not concerned with you having to give us a lot of legalese. Of course, there are certain legal terms that you must know, but for the rest of it, write it in a way that it explains what it is that you are saying. For example, if a question refers to giving a definition or explaining a certain principle, don't try to explain the principle by virtue of an example. Explain the principle as you understand what it means, and if you want to later support it by giving an example, do so. But an example should not be what is actually defining it if the question doesn't say that. You will find some questions require you to basically create certain of your own facts in order to draft. It's important that you must take note that when you create these facts, they must not change what the question is saying to you. So as far as the question is concerned, try to keep and align to the facts in terms of what the question is. Absorb as much information as you can in terms of the question. And in addition to that, you can then create the necessary information that needs to be there without deviating from the facts. You must also try not to study the morning of the exam. Don't cram the night before the exam because the syllabus in terms of ethics is huge. It covers you in your practice, your daily practice of an attorney, in terms of understanding what attorneys do, what don't they do, what it is that is required of you in certain specific situations. And over and above that, you also need to take note of how you're going to write it. So you must understand the substantive law and you must be able to do the practical application. You can never separate understanding and having a thorough knowledge of the law, the acts, the regulations, and the rules, and then testing them in terms of a practical situation. Now, you must try and answer one paragraph, one idea. So if you have sub-paragraphs, separate them into the different ideas. Of course, the golden thread of ethics basically is throughout the examination is basically that you will only understand the answer once you've worked out the whole question. So as you are writing the question and as you are drafting it, you might want to add something onto it, leave sufficient place to do that. You can do rough work on the left-hand side of your page if you so need, and write your answers categorically. So have them in a context that makes sense. You must have a general understanding of the roles and duties of a legal practitioner in practice, as well as being an officer of the court, your loyalties or your obligations towards the state, towards society in general, that we have a governing body that we answer to, the ethics and the ability to recognize these, the general applicability of the principles of practice, and of course, the drafting of certain kinds of documents is prescribed in your syllabus. You will also note again that the objective is you must have an adequate understanding of the law to be able to draft. If you do not understand a certain concept, you will not be able to draft it per se. The best way to do this is, of course, that you need to make summaries on the different topics. By the time you have prepared for the exam, you must be able to tick off everything in your syllabus to say that I have been through this, I understand what it is, and I know what it entails. You also must practice, practice, and practice. You must organize yourself in a way that you work through the different subjects. When you are in the exam, you sometimes find that different practices and different principles overlapped each other. So, for example, a question can start out where you, for example, are being questioned on a certain topic, but it overlaps with the ethics of something. So don't sit there and try to evaluate that I am what subject is this that I'm dealing with. Now you're trying to point out, is it ADR or what is it? And then you're trying to figure out, is it ethics? It is important for you to understand the substantive law, to be able to latch the answers so that they make sense, but apply the principles of law. You also must eat healthy, you must drink water and stay hydrated. Try not to leave blank spaces. Write legibly. Number your questions correctly. You sometimes land up in a situation where you don't number the questions correctly and it's difficult to make sense of which question it relates to. Think practically, start your new questions on a new line. Beware of any cross references. So you don't want to be in a situation where you refer to 4.5 or 4.6 above. In the meantime, there is no 4.5 or 4.6 because you've basically amended your answer per se. In addition to the syllabus that you have, you must also think constructively and think as an attorney would think. So you must think about it in a sense of what would I in this situation do? Now, it covers various topics. If you look at your code of conduct in terms of 3.1, your professional legal ethics basically covers what you would do in practice, what is expected of you in terms of the conduct, and various rules and regulations that apply. If we go on to the next page, you will see it relates to your constitutional law practice, which includes customary law. In other words, what it is that the Bill of Rights is, how do you establish what the limitations are, taking into account the jurisdiction of the different courts, what factors the courts take into account when evaluating whether a matter is a constitutional matter or not, and of course the Bay judgment in terms of your inheritance. Your labor dispute resolution, of course, deals with your dismissals, the disciplinary processes, the notices and warnings, what these entail, how do you process them, what do they include, what does the Labor Relation Act say about these matters? And of course, we know when it comes to Labor Relation Act, there's other ancillary legislation, which is your Basic Conditions of Employment Act and your Occupational Health and Safety Act, which you must also take into account in the unemployment insurance. Now, alternate dispute resolution, again, this year to a certain extent overlaps because you know that in terms of High Court and Match Court, there is mediation. You have your Rule 41A notice that is even attached to your summons. So we know the importance of mediation in terms of matters. We must be able to establish what the different forms are in terms of negotiation, conciliation, mediation, and arbitration. When I would use these procedures, what is the effectiveness of it? Why do people prefer this as opposed to court? And the processes in terms of how I would follow through with this. In terms of matrimonial property law, you need to obviously understand the different types of property regimes that you get, marital regimes. What is the consequences of them? How does this affect parties in a divorce matter? As well as taking into account the best interest of the child principle, knowing that you have the family advocate, you have the parenting plan, and the likes and the duties in terms of various parties in relation to that. Legal costs, again, overlaps with ethics. You will find in the code of conduct, they specifically mention attorneys should not overreach, you should not doubt, you should not undercharge. So we need to know what those concepts are. We need to understand how these are evaluated, how we calculate costs, what it is that we explain to our clients in terms of litigious, non-litigious matters, as well as the different cost factors and the mandates that we establish with clients. If we move on, we also need to know the difference between the different costs and be able to explain this to a client so they know exactly what it is that is being charged for, as well as the taxation of these bills. When can they be taxed? When, what is the effect of it? And of course, related aspects. Now, drafting of contracts comes from the principles of drafting, but I cannot draft if I don't understand theoretically what it is that I'm drafting. That's why we say you must have a theoretical understanding of something and you must be able to apply it to align it to a given set of facts and draft according to what the question says to you. Now, you will see that your syllabus refers to, for example, the deeds of sale for movable and immovable products, goods. It also the difference between your essential, natural, and incidental elements in terms of contracts, which is part of your study guide. And as my colleague has said before me, your guides in terms of lead are good source. In addition to that, there is a list of documents that is enlisted in your syllabus, which you can look at. Don't forget to look at the legislation because in terms of drafting of contracts, there's different legislation that applies to different principles. So, for example, if you look at acknowledgement of debt, can overlap with matrimonial property law, because is it the husband or the wife or both spouses that are signing my acknowledgement of that? In terms of matrimonial property law, are they both liable? I need to also pay attention to certain formalities. So, for example, do witnesses sign the contract, or what it is that I need to be signed by witnesses, who needs to sign. When you are drafting, don't leave out things like the date, the witnesses, who the deponent is, or who the party is that is citing. Subject your parties and identify them correctly. If you identify someone by giving them a title, make sure they refer to them as that title throughout your contract. You also need to look at various different examples in terms of understanding it. For example, you see the list says to you your deeds of sale, your boilerplate clauses, your acknowledgements of debt, the power of attorneys, the session, and you have the list here that is guiding you in terms of the different clauses. Remember that these clauses must be able to be drafted in the sense that you understand what it is that it entails, and you understand principles of law which you can then align to. If we move on, you will see that there's certain legislation mentioned, which is your National Credit Act, the Consumer Protection Act. We have the Information and Technology Practices in terms of the Electronic Communications Act that is also applicable. The Security for Personal Information, what it entails, the electronic documents and signatures, which overlaps directly even with your contracts, because your business email compromise, the interception of trust account payments, which overlaps with your code of conduct. What is the duties of the attorney? How do they go about rectifying this? And of course, your introduction to practice management, which is also covered in terms of your code of conduct, in terms of the regulatory requirements for legal practitioners. So what it is that you need to do, we have an answering body, which is the Legal Practice Council. What do we do to stay compliant? What must I have in order to practice? What's the rules and the role of the Legal Practitioners Fidelity Fund? What do they do? To what extent do they cover liability? The various insurance funds, the risk management, which includes my cyber fraud, my FICA, my POPI, and of course, the Legal Practice Act. So if you look at the prescribed legislation and you look at your substantive law that you understand, you need to understand it theoretically, and you need to be able to apply it to any given set of facts. Now, can you work through past questions? Can you look at examples? Yes, you can, but don't look at a past question or an example and study it verbatim and say, this is the only answer there can be. Answers of this nature are not rigid and cast in stone. They would differ based on facts, they would differ based on the case scenario that you have. So you need to understand principles which you can then apply. So, what is the principle I need to apply as an attorney, being my practice within a practice? That is what is important, and that is what you need to understand. Try to answer questions directly. If a question asks you may, should, shall, can, answer it with a yes or no, and then provide your reason. You sometimes tend not to answer the yes or no because you don't know what the correct answer is, but you might know what the reason is. You must answer with a yes or no as well. And other than that, I wish you all the best. Read your questions carefully, absorb information from the question, and then try to apply a legal principle or evaluate what needs to be done in a specific question. Study hard and, like I said, have a good breakfast, stay dehydrated, and apply your mind, write constructively. And all the best. I'm now going to hand over to Mr. Ashwin Trikamji, who will take you through paper 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajira. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and thank you to my colleagues for having given you quite a comprehensive explanation to the extent that it was required about what is expected of you for this examination. I'm going to discuss probably what I consider to be, I wouldn't like to call it the easiest paper, the simplest paper of the 4, because it is what it is. Accounting has no exceptions. The rule for accounting remains the same Whether you are in South Africa, whether you are in Russia, whether you are in China, it's the same. We all apply the same accounting principles. One of the questions that I get often asked quite often, especially when one is lecturing at the Practical Law School, is that many of the candidate attorneys ask the question, why do I have to study accounting? You know, when I qualify as a legal practitioner, I will just employ the best accountant in Durban, and I'll entrust my accountant to look after the requirements of the Act insofar as the keeping of attorneys or legal practitioners' books are concerned. Now, that's easier said than done because the law imposes an obligation on each and every legal practitioner to be responsible, personally responsible for the conduct of his or her trust account. So if there's a problem, and problems occur from time to time, from years of experience, I can tell you that many legal practitioners have got themselves into trouble simply because they've relied on their accountants, internal bookkeepers, financial assistants, and so on to meet the requirements of the Legal Practitioners Act insofar as the keeping of trust accounts is concerned, and of course with disastrous effects. So I want to emphasize that the obligation to maintain, especially the additional accounts, and that's the trust accounts, is exclusively confined to the legal practitioner. Let me make that very clear. And that is why it's so important, you know, for us to understand. Apart from the fact that as legal practitioners, I've always considered it, and I'm sure those of you who have been in practice and are going to be in practice in the near future will realize that accountancy is it's a tool of trade for you to practice as a legal practitioner. If you don't have a competent knowledge of accountancy, you will come short on many occasions in the course of your legal practice. And I'll just use a couple of examples, giving advice on commercial contracts, interpreting financial statements, advising clients on the effect of financial statements on a contract and so on. So that is, you know, my emphasis that is very important. And the syllabus is a very simple syllabus. There is nothing that ever changes. You are required, you know, to be able, first of all, to identify the most important obligation, and that is that whilst any other commercial enterprise by law is obliged to keep one set of books, as a legal practitioner, you have to keep that additional set. And that, of course, is the important one, and that is your trust account. And then, of course, flowing from there, your ability to write up a cash book. And again, here again, the question is asked, but why must I worry about writing up a cash book and go through the whole process of reconciliation statements and working out? Well, I can tell you again from experience that having been involved in many forensic audits, you would find that the majority of forensic audits which turn negative arise from the fact that monthly bank reconciliation statements have not been carried out, resulting in a disaster for a commercial enterprise. So I think it is very important for us to understand that writing up the cash book, balancing the cash book, and of course, extracting a bank reconciliation statement on a monthly basis is an absolute necessity. And you can expect some questions, if not all, many questions, if not one question, on this aspect of writing up attorney's books. From there on, you then proceed to how you deal with the other books in a set of books, how you deal with a journal, how you deal with the ledger. Now, when it comes to journals, the most important aspect of journal is the vexed question that always seems to be a challenge of transferring money from trust account to a business account and vice versa. When are you entitled to do that? Under what circumstances are you entitled to that? And what are the non-negotiable rules before you even think about effecting a transfer of money from your trust account to your business account. So you must know that. It is very, very important. It is an area of practice, which again, I must emphasize, always seems to get legal practitioners into trouble. So that is a very, very important part of the syllabus. Now, the other section of the syllabus deals with what we commonly call as agents accounts and correspondence accounts. Now, whilst they are called agents accounts and correspondence accounts, the essence of those accounts or those examples or those questions is really to test your ability to work your books of account across the board, which means, are you able to work through your trust cash book, business cash book, trust journal, trust ledger, business journal, business ledger, all those books at one time when you are dealing with transactions. And if you are able to do that, then to me, you have absolutely no problems. The question of agents accounts, the one little what I'd call a side issue that does come up, but of course here again it's important, is this whole question of collection commission. When are you entitled to charge collection commission? And flowing from that, of course, if you have the agent and correspondent relationship, what is the percentage that you can share? How many percent? What is the maximum percentage that you share? And what is the minimum percentage that you can share? If you are au fait with that and you know that, then you should have absolutely no problem. And then, of course, we do ask questions on what we call theory. And theory is really expecting you to know the theoretical requirements. How often do you have to audit your books? Who audits your books? How many times a year do you have to extract a trust trial balance? Why do you extract a trust trial balance? What is the effect of extracting the trial balance? And from there, flowing from that, the whole issue of VAT. Now, VAT at the moment is a big issue in South Africa because of the threat by the minister to increase VAT from 15 to 17%. But from our point of view as legal practitioners, VAT is a very, very important obligation to the fiscus. We have to charge VAT. When do you have to register as a VAT vendor? When do you not have to register as a VAT vendor? And of course, how do you account to the South African Revenue Services for the VAT that you collect? And those are questions based on theory. And of course, the other question which we ask you every now and then is a question which is very important, is the question of the investment of trust money. The section 86.3 and the section 86.4. When do you carry out an investment in terms of section 86.3 of the Act? What are the requirements if you do? What percentage is shared with the client? What is the percentage that goes to the legal practitioner's fidelity fund? And the same rule with regard to the investment of trust monies when it comes to section 86.4. What is the difference? What percentage is paid to the fidelity fund and what percentage is paid to the client? That in essence is what this entire syllabus is all about. Interspersed with what I just said out of the investments is every now and then you get a question on property transfers, how you deal with trust monies that you hold pending the registration of property transfers, how you deal with the effect of a bond being registered on a property, and so on. So other than that, colleagues, that what I've done very quickly is a very, very brief summary of the entire syllabus. There is nothing new that appears in an accounting paper that has never ever appeared in the past. That does not mean, I want to emphasize, that does not mean that the questions that you are going to be asked are the same questions that have been asked in the past. The questions are constantly modified, changed, essentially to test your knowledge to deal with accounting transactions, financial transactions. How do you deal with them? And most important is how you actually write up the books in your books of account. Other than that, may I take this opportunity of wishing all of you all the very best for the examinations. I can assure you from accounting, all of you are capable of getting, I always tease the candidates at the law school and say, all of you are capable of getting 101% in accounting. So good luck, and hopefully we will be smiling after the exams. Thank you. Margaret, I'm done. Kabelo?
Thank you, Mr. Trikamji, and thank you to the presenters. I'm now going to move on to the questions. We've received quite a number on the chat box, so I'll read them out and just invite any of the presenters to just turn on their mics and go ahead and answer the question. Okay, so the first one that I can see on my screen, okay, one candidate is asking, how were the candidates assigned to the various exam venues, particularly in Gauteng? The bulk of students residing in Pretoria have been assigned to Joburg South and vice versa. So I'm not sure, Ausmegi, if it's something that you are able to respond to before I move on to the next question.
No, Anonymous, you will have to contact the Gauteng Provincial Office to find out from them the venues. The venues are done in the provinces and not at the national.
Okay, thanks, Ausmegi. Again, the next question is for you. One candidate is asking, why can we not write in blue?
Because there's no water there. They've got no water at home. Sorry.
No problem. Thanks. And then,
no, that's not an answer.
Okay, so one candidate is asking, may one have a bottle of water on the desk? I'm assuming that's okay. Please advise me if that's not the case.
Yes, candidates may have water on their desk, but please, water, not alcohol.
Okay. Okay, then there is a question here for you, Mr. Trikamji. How much is bank recon usually worth in these papers? I'm assuming the candidates want to know kind of the mark allocation.
Yes. Yeah, it's
Please
very difficult. My response is very difficult to indicate. I would say at a guess, right, between 10 and 20%.
Thank you, sir. One person is saying, will we be able to highlight in our answer books to make it clear that the questions were answered in a different order? Ausmegi, in my mind here, I think it needs to be clear what question you are answering. Question one must be clear that it's question one. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add on to that.
Yeah, I would like to add to that, Kabelo. I think that one of the challenges that us examiners have is that when candidates answer the questions, and there's nothing wrong with it, of course, please don't get me wrong, in a different sequential order as opposed to the paper. So instead of starting with question one, they will start with question two and then go back to question one again. In that case, there's nothing wrong with it, but it is very, very important for the candidate to make it very clear in the answer books. Question one, I mean, in block letters, this is question one, and then the answer below that, because otherwise they confuse the examiners. So I think that's very, very important. Clearly identify the question that you are answering. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next question is, does it follow that the examiner cannot include a question dealing with a topic not listed in the syllabus? And the person makes an example there of business enterprises. So, Smegi, I'm assuming that if it's not in the syllabus we sent out, more or less, there won't be surprise questions, in other words.
No.
No, there won't be surprise questions, but if I may add, forms of business enterprise, I see is not in, usually those topics would be probably in paper 3, but paper 3 has set out which subjects it covers. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Kara. Let me look at the next question. Where in the exam paper book may we write our notes? I seem to recall it was on the left-hand side, if one of the presenters can guide me.
Yes, it's on the left-hand side. The right-hand side is what the examiners mark.
Perfect. Thank you
If
so
they
much.
write, sorry, if they write anything on the right-hand side, sometimes students tend to write certain parts in pencil. You know, taking it forward from the prep work, they take it onto the right side in pencil. If you write anything in pencil, it will not be marked.
Thank you, Ms. Kara. The next question is, what happens if you registered for 4 papers but are unable to write all of them?
If you don't pitch for the exam, you will not be allocated a mark and you will have to register for the next exam. You will also not be refunded.
Let me, I've just received more questions. Okay, Ausmegi, if you can remain on, is there a limit to how many chances you get to write these papers?
For now, no, there's no limit how many chances you have. You can write as many times as you have. Candidates must just be careful. There's a rule, don't have a specific rule out from the top of my head, but within 1 year of completing your PVT, you should bring your admission application, and if you can't, you must be able to explain to the court why not.
Thank you, Ausmegi. Does business enterprises fall under drafting contracts?
And the question is actually quite vague. If you look at your syllabus and you look at, the various aspects they've set out, it's not per se business enterprises, but if you are doing a contract, you need to know what sort of entity you are basically drafting it for. So if you look at, for example, the if you look at contracts, you will see that it says the essential material and natural elements of a contract. So, of course, one of your essential elements is going to be who a party to a contract is. That will also fall under your power of attorneys and your mandates. So, insofar as it is applicable to contracts, you must be able to understand it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kara. Any guidelines on writing the T accounts and journals on paper? Do we write each ledger or journal on a separate page?
No, they don't have to. They can use a T account very simply as long as they identify each T account very, very clearly. If it's going to be a ledger account, they must say so. They can draw a T and say ledger account, name of the client. That's fine. That's good enough.
Thank you, sir. Okay, I see there's a comment again on regarding the venue. I think it will be more for noting, Ausmegi. We were advised that we cannot request exam venue changes. Hence, the question is posed here, considering the influence that National might have, be that as it may, will attempt contacting the relevant office that the venue placements are reconsidered. If I may ask also the candidate, maybe you can also just, please do still contact the provincial office, but if you're struggling, maybe just send an email to info@lpc.org.za and we'll see how we can assist. But the first starting point is, of course, the provincial office. The next question is that okay, it's a compliment. Thank you to all for this session. And then the question is it possible to get a bit of a mark breakdown for paper 1 and paper 3? Mr. Minid, are you able to respond to paper 1 before Ms. Kara comes in?
Yes. Look, paper 1 is divided into 4 equal parts. It's Magistrates Court, High Court is 25% of the paper. Motor vehicle accident is 25% of the paper. Criminal procedure is 25% of paper. And Magistrates Court 25, High Court 25, Magistrates Court, motor vehicle, and criminal procedure. The 4 sections, yeah. The 4 topics, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Kara, do you want to talk about the breakdown for paper 3?
Yes, thank you. So paper 3 generally, like I said, subjects overlap with each other. So it's difficult to say what the breakdown exactly is like. But to give you an idea, your paper is, some questions are theory, some are drafting. If you look at it, your drafting questions are usually in the region of about 50 to 60%, whereas theoretical questions are about 30 to 40%.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kara. Where can we keep our bags, which usually would have notes inside? Is it under the table or are there lockers?
That will depend from venue to venue, Kabelo. It will be announced at the exam venues, but it can that will depend from venue to venue. Normally, we'd ask them to place it under the tables or the back of the wall, but it will depend from venue to venue. Announcements will be made at the venues. Candidate must just listen to the announcements.
Okay, thank you very much. For paper 2, do we cite the correct section of the Interstate Succession Act if we need to calculate any distribution to the interstate heirs?
Yes, I think it is very important that you do know once you know the Interstate Succession Act, that you also know the sections applicable.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Trikamji, one candidate is requesting the mark breakdown for paper 4, please.
There is no breakdown for paper 4 marks. As I indicated, somebody asked a bank reconciliation statement, what percentage. And I indicated it's a minimum of 10 marks, 10% or 10 marks and maximum of 20. Similarly, you get questions on the correspondence accounts. You will get questions on the theory section. All of those all vary in marks. There isn't a clear breakdown to say that for correspondence we will only have 20 marks. For theory, we will only have 10 marks. The marks vary from time to time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trikamji. The other question is, if I've written exams and passed the exams, but I struggle to obtain PVT, let's say maybe for 3 years, will I be required to rewrite the exams again?
No, once you've written the exam, you don't have to rewrite. But I feel for clarity, should you have written your exam during the Legal Practice Act time, meaning from 1 October 2018 up until now, you don't need to rewrite. But if there's any exam that you've written during the Attorneys Act and the LPA, there are some sections that you have to rewrite, and I refer the candidate to Rule 22 in this regard.
Thank you very much, Osnegi. I'm going to take maybe 2 more. There is one candidate who is seeking confirmation around documentation. The question is, what documents do I need to bring in the exams room, e.g. identity document, and what documents?
Thank you, Mr. Litebele. You'll have to bring your identity document. If you don't have one, a copy of your passport or driver's license is also okay. You'll also will receive a letter confirming that you are registered from the provincial office and for which modules or which subjects. You also bring a copy of that letter.
Thank you very much, Osnegi. Okay. There is one person who's written in capitals that may we please write in blue. Just a reminder that the exams must be written in black, with a black pen. So thank you. Just for confirmation, please make sure it's a black pen. I'll take the last two comments or questions. The second last one says here, if you write all 4 exams and do not pass 1 or 2, are we expected to re-register and pay? Ausmeki?
Can you please repeat the question, Kabelo?
So if you write all 4 exams, but do not pass 1 or 2 of them, for the next set of exams, is the candidate expected to re-register and pay again?
Yes, for each exam that you are going to write, you must register and pay for it. So if you don't pass your March exams now, you are going to pay to write the August exam, and you're going to pay. You must register. It's not automatically that you are going to qualify, and you must pay the registration fee.
Thanks, Ausmeki. Ausmeki, do we know more or less when the results would be released? That's another question on the chat.
No, the results, it's not determined yet. Council will determine the release date, and it will be communicated to the candidates.
And then the final question is for you, Mr. Trikamji. It just came in now. The question is, with regards to paper 4, more specifically to investments in terms of Section 86.
3 and
Section
4.
86, yes. Interest to be allocated to the respective beneficiaries. I see that there are 2 ways in which we can transfer such interest accumulated. Some use the trust journal to transfer to specific beneficiaries, others transfer back to the trust cash book, then to the beneficiary's trust account. Will it matter which method was used? So
you can use either method.
Okay.
It's safer, it is always safer that you use what is prescribed by the Act, and that is from your trust cash book, the interest goes straight through to the beneficiaries. But there are other people that use the longer method that you mentioned, and there's nothing wrong. You won't be marked down for that, and you certainly will get your mark for that as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trikamji. So those are all the comments or questions that I could see on the chat. Can I just check with all the presenters? Is there any other point, or anything you want to say before we move towards the end? Mr. Mini, can I start with you, sir?
Thank you very much.
Nothing from my side.
Nothing from my side. Sorry,
just
nothing from my side. Thank you.
Sorry, Ajira. I just want to confirm that from the estate side, you will not be expected to calculate an accrual claim. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. I see the questions keep on coming. Will the session be placed in the LPC website? So what we will do, my team will ensure that in the next 2 days, the recording is available on the LPC YouTube channel. Okay, it will be on the LPC YouTube channel. We will also share the link on our Facebook and our X social media accounts. I will also ask the team to just send a link to the video plus this syllabus, which you already have, to all the registered candidates. So that's what we're going to do with the recording. I think with that, let me see. Ausmeki, any other final thoughts before we end the session?
Kabelo, thank you very much to you for conducting this whole session, difficult session. Thank you so much. You're always very competent. And to everybody else, good luck.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you to Mr. Kabelo and to Maggie. You've made this very easy for all of us.
Thank you, ma'am.
And accessible. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. Good luck to all the candidates. The recording will be available through our social media, and we'll also distribute it to all candidates. Good luck with the exams and all the best. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.